Good afternoon, everyone. We are now back with Mr. Han Meiqing for Cultural Engines for Global Business Leadership Development. Mr. Han Meiqing served with China Council for the Promotion of International Trade, CCPIT, and China Chamber of International Commerce, CCOIC, since 1990. His job focuses on Chinese foreign trade and investment promotions around the world. He began his career as a desk officer for the Middle East market, then the resident deputy representative to Sydney, Australia, furthering a project manager and technical expert for joint business matching operations sponsored by the European Commission. He later served as CCPIT Director for Multilateral Economic and Trade Cooperation, and also the Director for Trade and Investment Promotion with Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau. In 2006, he was elected as Vice Chairman of the local Chamber of Commerce in Chengdu. In 2008, he served as Deputy Director General of CCPIT International Relations, responsible for trade promotion activities in North America, South America, and Oceania. 5 years later, he was elected as Director General of International Cooperation in the China Chamber of International Commerce. Mr. Han Meiqing graduated from Beijing Foreign Studies University with a BA degree in 1987 and received his master's in linguistics at the Postgraduate School of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in 1990. He has served as the regional coordinator and leadership of international organizations, notably PBEC, the APEC Business Advisory Council, the United Nations Trade Promotion Organization, and other technical consulting institutions. Additionally, the Chinese Secretary General of the Business Council under Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He has been a guest professor since 2017 at the Academy for International Business Officials, Ministry of Commerce, People's Republic of China, providing lectures on Chinese foreign business cultural integration to Asian, African, and Latin American employees working in Chinese MNEs. In June 2018, he joined as member of the China Association for Intercultural Communication, and in 2019 was elected to its vice chairman. His current research interests are cross-cultural communication, transcultural management for organizational adaptation to globalization. We welcome you, Mr. Han, for being our afternoon plenary speaker on cultural engines for global business leadership development. Over to you.
Thank you, Sonny. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session. I'll be talking about cultural engines for global business leadership development. Business leadership is a cultural hero in his or her organization. The higher a leader moves up the corporate ladder, the harder my job would be as a cross-cultural coach. For some businesses, together with their management consultant, global leadership belong with an elite group with cosmopolitan values and best practices that would be the key to global business success. But from my perspective, as a trained cultural psychologist, global leadership is a process of adaptation rather than a well-defined collection of traits, characteristics, or inherent qualities of either individuals or organizations. So in this hour, I'll be talking about two basic questions. One is, how could business leadership become global, and why cultural aspect is significant? The other is, what kind of individual and organizational development are relevant in shaping the type of global leadership? They are indeed two sides of one coin. I call the coin Transcultural Competence in global business leadership. The first time I ran into the concept of global business leadership was when a prestigious university in China asked me to join with them in preparing a curriculum for a brand new course entitled Global Business Leadership. They knew well no such program could be free of cultural diversity issues. I was amused by the big word global, because the faculty proposing programs for global leadership is actually called international business management in the first place. So I joked with my colleagues, why shouldn't we replace IB study, which stands for International Business Studies, with GB studies, to stand for Global Business Studies. In the English lexicon, worldwide use of globalization in books, magazines, and other media was on the rise all of a sudden around the turn of the century. You could see from this picture that business internationalization is not as important as before, while globalization is a very frequently used word. The same pattern replicates in the Chinese word frequency use of globalization, a few years later than the English counterpart, but at a much rapid rate, which is shown here by an almost cliff-like slope. You could see, while the word internationalization in Chinese falls sharply in recent years compared with its English counterpart. The linguistic transition from international to global coincided with the growth of world trade, FDI, and a new player silently emerging. That is global value chain. You could see from this graph, in terms of its share in the world trade, global value chain, we will later call it GVC in short, grew rapidly in the 1990s. And from the year 2000, it had been keeping on a momentum, but stagnated after the 2008 global financial crisis. And at the present, it has to face a setback from the impacts of COVID-19 epidemic. However, GVC network expansion has passed its critical mass to have changed business landscape. A good example of the geographical concentration of global 500 companies in Asia. I'll show it in the next slide. You could see from 2005, Asia Global 500 companies began its journey to catch up with US and Europe. In a decade, it overtook both US and Europe. It would be a bit bizarre, I think, if Asian businesses is left out when talking about global business leadership. It is interesting that the phrase business globalization taking linguistic prominence also coincided with the rise of Asian business leadership in a global arena. So, why should I talk so much about economics? I'm supposed to talk about culture. Because what GBC has brought with it, as shown in this slide, is very important to the business leadership. Its ramification is as important reason for global leadership to have a cultural engine to meet the challenges of diversity and inclusion. You could see business more relational and independent, and sustainable supply chain position is more strategic than before. Value creation is now the basis for competitive advantage. Long-term strategic thinking is emphasized than ever before. Here I show you that regional participation in GBC cross-border for production, the supply chain. The orange circle represents the EU cluster, the green ones US cluster, and the red ones Asian cluster. On the left side, we have data from year 2000. On the right, we have 2017. This one is for simple value chain trade networks. By simple value chain, we mean we export or import a product or service directly to the consumers in another country. This is the demand side. You could see the changes. This one is the complex trade networks, which means you export a product to another country, not for consumers, but for production. So they will cross the border twice, where the complexity is. The demand side, I just show you the supply side. Implication, yes, so many pictures. That proves something some economists emphasize. They no longer are the geocentric globetrotters who were transferred from country to manage foreign operations, seen as exemplars of good global leaders. It means that global leaders are more sophisticated in their experiences. And what is demanded of them is very excellently expressed here. They have the ability to transcend their childhood acculturation, build cross-cultural partnerships, respect their obligations, actively engage in cross-cultural performance and conflicts, and help to construct new cultures based around projects. So this is the second part. I'll be talking about a concrete example to show you. One immediate challenge for going global is running into different cultural landscapes. And business motivation is one tangible example to start with. This is a multiple choice questionnaire that I asked my Indonesian class, Thailand class, and Chinese class in 2019. It was first designed and used 2 decades ago to test a group of MBA students from 15 countries and regions. The choices were collected by international business researchers in an exhaustive manner so that respondents would have all the possible alternatives to choose from. I like the design because it asked the respondents about the preference of business goals of their top leaders. If the respondents were business tycoons themselves, it would be suspected of the authenticity and even possible cover-up by the leadership themselves about the real motivation as business leaders. And for sure, nobody in my class knew this questionnaire, not to say the answers. That would be with systematically various patterns by cultures. And what surprised me is the answers from audience, I mean the Chinese audience, was almost the same as how Chinese business managers answered them the first time around the year 2000. And this is the 6th top most valued motivation for Chinese business leadership. Number 1 and number 2 and number 6 actually are a bit exceptional if compared with the world average, because very few other cultures take them as priorities. But number 3 is commonplace around the world. I disclosed the original answer by Chinese respondents in 2002 to Thailand and Indonesian classes of mine, respectively, when they knew about the Chinese choice of top priorities of business motivation. They shook their heads emphatically, saying that number 2 was beyond their comprehension. They said it was absurd and somewhat irrelevant to be a business goal. Although as an individual, patriotism and national pride should be a natural and spontaneous feeling for each and every one of them. And I told my Chinese students about the comments from Thailand audience and the Indonesian audience. And one of my students, who is a Chinese CEO of a private company, stood up and asked me and the whole class somewhat emotionally, isn't that the reason China develops faster? And this is the most valued motivations for US business leaders. I did not show here responses from other cultures. Actually, they are identical with neither Chinese or US preferences. So we have different answers from different cultures. Simple as they are, the fact itself point to a direction otherwise in the dark for many of the Chinese and Asian companies. That is, we have different motivations, systematically different, among different cultural orientations. So, to the uncomfortable audience of Chinese of mine, I show them the data collected from other cultures. Actually, only a very small fraction of societies and cultures appreciate Chinese mentality in terms of business goals, inclusive of national pride at the organizational level, which means a majority of societies and culture wouldn't so much be appreciative of Chinese preference of the national pride being as one of the most valued business orientation. So let's see the significance of this example and its implication. Number one single attitude valence will not be culturally distinguishable only when embedded in a set of preferences with priority order than otherwise. For example, national pride and patriotism I focused upon just now as a motivation. It's nothing extraordinary and unimaginable. But once you have to prioritize your business goals, in China, in non-Chinese societies, it amazingly falls back to the back seats, actually. And number two, all possible leadership motivation could be a list very long, but not unlimited. It is the different combination of several most value items that make the difference. This sort of pattern took place in many other scenarios. And number three, global leadership could not what I call transcultural competence, which refers to awareness of cultural differences and commonalities, communication skills, and inclusiveness to diversity that enable individuals and organizations to adapt effectively in global environments. Here, in accordance with what I said just now, transculturality, I propose the solution for Chinese leadership to go global. Some of the values we must hold on to, irrespective of where we are. For example, responsibility towards society. And some of the values we should be having an inclusive attitude, like respecting ethical norms, because ethical norms are culturally different. And sometimes we have to respect host country, like the controversial item of patriotism and national pride. Actually, after I coached one of the Chinese companies, they changed their advertisement because in their advertisement, they have something like our company is working for the economic development of China, for the happiness of Chinese people. But they have to change it when they go beyond border, when they are going global. And some values will have to be flexible, like honor, faith, and reputation. And of course, we have to adapt to other preferences, not listed here. So here, I try to have some advice for US global leadership. I'm not saying they are absolute, but just as a reference. Because many of the US values are very much individualistic and would be echoed in cultures similar to US. But still, my advice is that, for example, number 2, this year's profit. In cultures like China, Korea, and other Eastern countries, long-term strategy is appreciated. A joint venture or a US operation in China should pay attention to this very different strategic thinking. And number 4, for example, US companies should perhaps appreciate the significance of faith in their communication, in their behavior, to show respect to a hierarchical society like China, Southeast Asian countries, and Indian continent. Of course, we have some of the US most valued items respectful. For example, staying within the law, respecting ethical norms. And these are very good examples of why US companies are doing good in the global leadership, in their business global leadership. So after this concrete example, I would just briefly touch upon some of the latest development and offer my brief critiques. Basically, these 2 examples I'll be talking about. One is about methodology. The other is theoretical in nature. Both are significant for businesses to update and refresh their conceptualization of global business leadership with cultural perspectives. The first research is one meta-analysis of 112 empirical studies involved in 31 countries, including North America, Europe, and Asian countries like India, Malaysia, China, Pakistan, Singapore, South Korea, and Thailand. The research found statistically significant correlations among 11 leadership practices and 7 types of outcome measured around the world. So here there are 2 sets of concepts. One is leadership practice, which means what global leadership practices, what they are doing in their daily work. So there are 11 types of leadership practices. And outcome means the effect, the result of these 11 practices as measured by different tools like questionnaires, like inventories, like database with respondents from individuals, subordinates, counterparts, leaders themselves, and people from other institutions. I'll show you in the next slide about the 7 types of outcome. But here on the horizontal line, we picked up 4 kinds of leadership practices because they stand out as significant to the 7 types of outcome measures, which means these 4 kinds of leadership practice are significantly influential. However, as you could see in this picture, the 4 leadership practices carries with them different weight for different stages of economic development, namely developing economies, developed economies, and highly developed economies, as shown on the top of this picture by different level of grayness. You could see from the graph that highly developed economies focus on 2 of the leadership practice, while developing economies focused on the other 2, by contrast of the gray and black ones, of course. Yes, I just show you 4 types of leadership practice that are significant. Here, this slide is meant to show you the 7 outcome measurements of leadership on the vertical axis: job performance, belief, appraisal, job satisfaction, organizational engagement, psychological health, leadership. So it's very obvious in the leadership practice of modeling desired behavior. In plain English, it means that in leadership in developing countries do not match with their counterparts in developed economies in terms of setting good examples to peers and subordinates. This one is interesting, very interesting. And some of the business leaders might not be comfortable with this finding, but this is a statistical finding, not applicable to every individual. This study is significant because this study used evidence-based leadership development strategies. I emphasize this because one obvious and salient advantages of academic study is that you can't rely upon sporadic and individual cases to support your theory about leadership development. This is just what we do in some of the coaching business and in some of the training courses about business leadership in MBA schools, especially in China, in mainland China. We have a focus on case studies. Of course, case studies are good. And actually, a lot of good case studies are coming from the States, from Europe. And they are very much relevant. But trust me, that case study, you have to be very careful about its circumstances, about the environment, about the context. The leadership trait or practice in a specific scenario would not, never applicable in your specific situation. So that's one important lesson I learned from this study. And secondly, the type of leadership practices that ought to be the focus of leadership development strategy. So we have to be careful that we have lots of leadership practices, but not every type of practice is useful and relevant to our culture. And we have to be careful. Some of the leadership practices are culture sensitive, as I show you in the first slide in this section. The third one is about we should try to figure out which type of leadership practice is related to which type of outcome. So that means leadership practice would be related to certain type of outcome. And it's a function of the environmental variant, which means a very good practice, leadership practice in your situation would achieve some other outcomes unexpectedly for people in other societies and cultures. This is difficult to apprehend, especially in practice. People will not be reminded of such a kind of sharp differences of same seemingly universal truth, but doesn't work in reality. But still, I'll share with you my critics about this study. Through my 11 years of experience for coaching Chinese expatriates, coaching foreign employees working in China, I believe global leadership is not only relevant to develop his or her own global competence, but also he or she should be aware of the process of the group dynamics especially in a cross-cultural environment. For example, if you are leading a multicultural team in your country, or if you are leading foreign employees in a foreign country, you have to be very careful. That leadership best practice is a very tricky matter. And secondly, I think potential global leadership should be paying attention to balance of hard and soft skills for individuals and organizations. By soft skills, I mean you should grasp soft skills as a presenter, a mediator, and a conciliator in different business situations. In the meanwhile, you have to be possessive of hard skills in the area of your business. And the third one is domestic leadership practice and outcome does not necessarily translate abroad. This one is very important because the best candidates we select from our headquarters abroad most often are the best business managers and the leadership, and we place great hope on them because they are doing good in China or in Japan, Korea. We send them abroad and we are confident they are doing good. So therefore, I'm more than suspicious if developing economies would be as advantageous in terms of motivation, communication, and confidence building when they encounter cultures with different motivational preferences, different confidence building strategies. I'll go back to our previous. Now here, you could see the first leadership practice, organizational visioning, indicating that Asian companies are very good in their scores, in their outcome scores. But actually, if this Asian company is leading a multicultural task force or multicultural team, it would be dubious. It would be another story. I believe the scientists doing this research are conducting their experiences, targeting the domestic business organizations. And likewise, the last cluster of BARS, confidence building practice, a developing country also score higher than developed economies. I'm still suspicious about what they would score in a multicultural situation. Let's go back, yes. So last one. In another development, one German economist called Dr. Joseph Wieland developed a model integrating all prominent conceptual relations in cross-cultural research based on his theoretical framework of relational economy. So he's an economist and his specialty is relational economy. In his theory, transculturalism is built into the implicit rules of communication and management practices at the level of institutions. And transculturalism is manifested by interculturalism at individual level and multiculturalism at organizational level. For detailed description, you could see the explanation in these circles. Actually, these three words are buzzwords in the cultural psychology and intercultural communication. These are the best quotes of my favorite quotes from Dr. Joseph. He said, 70% of world trade is not controlled by a market, but among organizations. This comment, this observation, shocked me when I first heard them. Global market is controlled by free trade. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the formulation and development of global value chain. But in terms of the agencies, the practitioners of these trade and business transactions, it is organizations who are doing the job. So that's why organizational behavior and the theme of this conference, this meeting, organizational development, are very much relevant in today's world where business are striving to achieve global business leadership. A second quote of my favorites is, culture is not a management tool or constraint or enabler for business. It is directly a part of economic transactions due to its role in value creation. I like the word value creation because business is about value creation. It's a very sophisticated interaction in terms of psychology, sociology, politics, international relations. No other activities could be more sophisticated than this. And in every link, at every level, at every stage, at every moment, everywhere, people are judgmental. People are emotional. And people are confrontational. So that's why Dr. Joseph is more than correct in saying that culture is everywhere within all the transaction activities. This observation, I think, is very much useful to the global leadership. Sorry. Yes, it's my critic. I'm not criticizing the doctor. I'm just have some of my feedbacks, some of my comments. I think Dr. Wieland, his constructs of interculturality, multiculturality, has been a bit oversimplified. And his transcultural competence lacks substances supported by other disciplines of social sciences. He needs empirical support. But I should admit, multidisciplinary approach is now turning into a fashion, which is good to international businesses. It is fairly rare that an economist like Dr. Joseph Wieland, values so highly the cultural dimension of social and economic life. And Dr. Wieland is very sharp in his observation that cross-cultural communication and management, as I call them, transculturality in this presentation, have overemphasized cultural differences for too long. Now, lots of companies I go to, either to coach their managers or provide lectures to their team, are sort of familiar with what I'm going to talk with them, cultural differences. Cultural differences are barriers, cultural differences are bad things, etc., etc. The negative ramification of overemphasizing cultural difference has been spreading all over business communities, not only in China, all over the world. It is time for us to be aware what we share in common among different cultures, as well as what we differ. And besides, when we talk about innovation, diversity, we have to somehow, amazingly, rely upon cultural differences. If we are the same, we are identical from head to toes, we wouldn't be creative. There would be no clash of ideas and opinions. No new cultures would be created in our organizations. So I will not continue to elaborate this point. I'm very grateful as a transcultural coach and lecturer to the scientific research I talk about in this section 3. And I will be more than happy to further elaborate on the topics some other occasions to my audience. I think that's the content I'm sharing with you. If you have any questions or comments, we can share. I think we have more than 10 minutes to share and exchange our ideas. So any questions from my audience? How should I stop sharing my screen?
Thank you, Dr. Han. We're going to open it up to questions for Dr. Han now. And to the audience, we recommend for you to look into your question pane and add any questions for Dr. Han on his Good Cultural Engines for Global Business Leadership Development presentation.
I see a red dialogue symbol flashing here. Is that, yeah. So we are thinking about your questions. I could be talking about my contemporary work, my research work now. I'm actually doing a job as the co-investigator in the famous Global Leadership Research Project. It covers about 130 countries and regions. And we're planning to investigate the leadership preferences of different cultures. This is a very large-scale investigation headed by American Professor Javidin. And it's called Global Leadership Effectiveness and Organizational Behavior. We have been doing this research over about a year, and the papers we're going to publish in 2021. I was the Chinese translator of questionnaires, about half hour's length for respondents from Chinese speaking community to answer those questions. And I got lots of facts, because I'm the contact point for Chinese business community. I got lots of questions from the respondents, and I contacted the international team of this project. Somebody called us the Manhattan Project #2, because this scale is too large, too many countries. Altogether, we have 388 co-investigators like me, who are digging deep into the local business community to ask for what are the most important business leadership traits. I have lots of questions in my mind, and I asked these questions with international team. One of the most puzzled problem is cultural differences. About every dozen of questions we asked local business managers, there would be at least one that the local managers would be hesitating in answering. And I asked them why. Why should you omit answering certain questions? Why are you hesitating over some questions? Because the technology is very advanced. If you are hesitating answering a certain question, the computer will record it. So they say, I really do not know what are you talking about. It's not a problem of translation, because we are using advanced translation technology, like translating back and forth, using bilingual guarantees that the meanings would be exactly the same. And we have a very low chance of making translation mistakes. So the managers could not be getting lost in translation. And it's not a problem of the respondents either. It's because whenever you are asking about concepts, about ideas, these concepts and ideas, most often than not, are very much different in different societies. And most frustratingly, some concepts seemed never exist in certain cultures. So that's why some managers got confused. If you are interested in this global scale investigation, I will be talking about it on some occasions. And this global research is very much interesting. It would be providing lots of data. I think hundreds of thousands MBA schools worldwide would be benefiting from this research and its findings. So in year 2004, we got some answers. We got some statistical significant results from our surveys. I'll show you some example. For example, there is a leadership style called participation, which means a leader would encourage his subordinates to participate in the decision-making process. So participatory leadership is more common in German-speaking countries and regions, and Northern Europe as well, but less so in Middle East, Eastern Europe, East Asia, and South Asia. And this one is not beyond our expectations. Another finding is interesting, which says that South Asia and East Asia are more, their leadership are more self-protective. But the weakest self-protection style is in Northern Europe and German-speaking countries. And countries with weaker autonomous leadership. Autonomous leadership means independence. In Asia, obviously, our leaders will not appreciate very much about his direct subordinate to be very much independent, having his own ideas, especially those ones different from his or hers. So countries with weaker autonomous leadership are concentrated in Latin America, Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So in these areas, even we Chinese, we Asians, we go there and asking for advice from our subordinates. It would be fertile in our efforts. Another interesting finding is that the strongest humane style of leadership is found in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. I just raised some examples, and most of them have been proved authentic and correct. But still, there are some leadership traits seemingly missing when we consulted with indigenous psychologists and anthropologists. For example, in China, the Chinese scholars proposed that Chinese leadership has an extra dimension, which we call it family style, which means a leadership in China would be typically like run by a father or a mother as the head of the company. And his style He is humane. He would care about the children, which are his or her subordinates. But still, the hierarchy should be respected, and parents would have absolute power. And in this year's investigation, the survey and research include this dimension into the international leadership traits. Hopefully, we could see what other countries are similar or identical with this typical Chinese style. Okay, I think time is up for me. Even though I don't have questions, I hope you could all of you could contact me through emails. And for those Chinese who didn't quite catch what I'm saying, because I'm speaking in English, and you could contact me. I will work it out to provide you some Chinese version of what I'm talking about. Thank you very much.
Mr. Han, we actually do have 2 questions.
Yes, thank you.
If you're available for additional time, yes.
Yes, I'm available. But how,
Yes,
how could I withdraw from my screen sharing?
Yes, so what I can do is simply moderate the questions to you.
Okay.
Great. And so, Mr. Han, the first question is regarding your research. In your opinion, what is a good standard of global business leadership?
My answer is actually I'm not having an answer. I have to rely upon the empirical study, which needs evidence, both qualitative and quantitative research. We have to find the answer based on field work, based on statistical findings. At present, I think some of the leadership traits are very much concentrated in terms of their frequency. I mean, by frequency, I mean the majority of leadership across culture share these common characteristics. The 2 I know best are teamwork, the leadership encouraging teamwork and facilitating teamwork would be considered a good leadership everywhere in the world. I think this one must be an integral part of global leadership. Another one is interesting because this word is abstract. This adjective describing leadership is very abstract. It's called charismatic. People around the world would be telling scientists that they like charismatic leadership. But what is charismatic leadership? This is very difficult to define. But still, people are stubborn in saying that this is a very important ingredient or prerequisite to be a good leader. Aside from these 2 traits, I haven't have confidence in answering that there are other universally accepted leadership qualities. Yes, please, the next one.
Excellent key insights about the variability of these very soft skill based definitions. The next question is regarding the findings that Chinese CEOs value national pride and patriotism in organizational success. Is this finding consistent, and can it also be applied to local Chinese companies that do not have focus on international business expansion?
This question is interesting, and I think yes. What I didn't say is that in China, the loving of the country is associated with lots of things. For example, even a domestic company is praised or have positive comments from the government, local government, they would be very much honored. And if a company is subsidized or given financial support, they are very much proud to put it into their self-advertisement materials, that they are working with the authority of the countries, and they have the backing of their country. But on the other side, if the companies have problems and their problems are solved by the local authorities, they will be also very happy. This kind of psychology and social mentality might be very Chinese and difficult to understand in other countries. I didn't mention this because I do not have enough time to elaborate every details. For American companies, for UK, Australia, when I provide lectures to them, I have discussed with them in detail about this problem. But here, I think most of my audience, perhaps they're Asian companies or Chinese companies, so I do not elaborate in much detail.
Thank you, Mr. Han. That concludes the questions for your presentation. We appreciate your excellent insights and your overview of the research that is going on today.
Thank you, Sonny. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. To contact Mr. Han, please look to his presentation, and please, if there's any additional questions or follow-ups, please share. Moving into the next section, we are going to be moving into the concurrent open space, where we will have 5 tracks. Track 1 is exploring the dynamics of change. Track 2 is transforming organizations in Asia. Track 3 is creating a new OD and expanding learning in Asia. Track 4, developing leadership in Asia. And Track 5, building innovative culture. We will reconvene at 15:30 China local time. For all speakers that are part of the tracks, please join your GoToWebinar session now so that we may verify your audio, visual, and also screen share capabilities. Thank you, everyone.